Today, I'm going to be talking about something very different, which is I'm going to be sharing how I personally overcame a decade-long eating disorder. And because of the way YouTube works, I'm going to be from here on out referring to that as an ED. If you want to know the specific one I'm talking about, I'll put it up on screen. Couple of disclaimers. Obviously, if you clicked on this video, you already know, but I'm going to be discussing EDs. Don't worry, I don't get too graphic. I don't talk numbers. I don't show before and after pictures. So if you're worried about that triggering you, it's not going to happen. But still, proceed at your own discretion. And the second disclaimer is that although I am a doctor of clinical psychology, this is very much not a prescriptive video. This is not me telling you what to do. This is really just me sharing what pulled me out of a decade-long ED. But I also had a lot of therapy for it, and so this is not a substitute for mental health treatment. This is not medical advice. Always seek that out yourself. It's so strange making this video now. I think when I wasn't fully recovered, I would have sort of made this video for all the wrong reasons. I would have made this video to show how bad I was, because if you have an ED, you know that, people get real competitive with it and they want to show how much a part of their identity it is. And now I don't identify with it. And so I was almost thinking like, should I make this video? Should I not? Ultimately, I decided that I do want to make this video for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I remember how hopeless I felt when I was in the thick of it. And I remember thinking that I was never going to get better, nothing was ever going to work for me. And once I actually overcame it, that completely dispelled all those beliefs. And for me, it really was like a flip of a switch. Like, you might not believe me, and I'll talk about what that switch was, but out of all the things that I tried in therapy and everything, there was one thing that really made a difference for me. And so if I help even one person to see that there is light at the end of the tunnel and that there is hope for full, true recovery, and that you don't have to be constantly battling this your whole life, then this video is worth it. And I think another reason why I want to make this video is that I come on here and I try to be very polished, in my appearance, in the way that I speak. I try to be very eloquent. I try to cover all my bases. I try to be as perfect as possible. And I think that sometimes people misunderstand that, and they assume that my life is actually perfect, when in reality, my life is very flawed. I've gone through very painful things like most people. And one of the most hurtful things that people can really say to me is when they make assumptions about not having gone through difficult experiences. Out of all the ugly, hateful comments that I've gotten over the years, there's one that made me cry, and that to this day I still remember. It was on a video about EDs that I had made like a few years ago. I think it was maybe about like body dysmorphia, techniques to manage body dysmorphic episodes. And I might still have a screenshot. I'll try to put it on screen, but it was something along the lines of like, it's hard enough to watch a video from someone that looks like you, and then to also hear you say that body dysmorphia only lasts maybe a week just shows how little you know what you're talking about. Like, you just can't relate at all to the struggles. I cried when I read that comment because I was like, I don't feel comfortable disclosing my history at this point, but people are making all these assumptions about me and my pain is going completely unseen. People assume that my life is like this perfect thing and that I have no idea what I'm talking about, and I can't even tell them how wrong they are. And of course, even back then and even now, I understand where that comment is coming from. I understand the sort of complexes that person brought to the table when they made that comment. But it's really hurtful when people make assumptions and when people don't see the pain that you're in. So here's the structure of how we're going to talk about this today. I'm going to briefly give you a little bit of a background on my story with the subject, touch a little bit on the skills from therapy that maybe helped a little, but the bulk of this video is going to be on the one thing that completely was a game changer for me, and it actually was born out of kind of a shitty experience. And then I want to talk about where I'm at with things now. This is where I really want to instill some hope in you guys that if you're struggling with this, it is absolutely possible to overcome it. And if I'm feeling a little brave, I think I'll end by talking with how there are certain things about the recovery mindset that I believed back in the day and that, my therapist tried to instill in me that I just no longer agree with. Things that are maybe a little bit atypical about my recovery process. So I developed my ED at age 15. I think it's a pretty typical age in adolescence. A lot of girls will start to get very self-conscious about their body, will start to notice messages from the media and comments from other people, and they'll sort of latch on to those as a way to comply with beauty standards. So I was in Romania at the time. I was there for the summer, and I just decided, I'm gonna eat as little as possible and work out as much as possible and see how much weight I can lose. And that is exactly what happened. But I will say there were definitely some signs that I had restrictive tendencies long before that. Even as a baby, I refused food. As a result of certain attachment ruptures that occurred. And then even when I was small, before even puberty, I remember I saw like an elliptical in one of my family members' houses. And I said, oh, how long would you have to go on this elliptical in order to lose a noticeable amount of weight? I do think there's some sort of genetic component there that like there's something driving like a very restrictive mindset that takes hold very early on. And so in between ages like 15 to 20, I yo-yoed. I yo-yoed so hard between usually in the summer when, I was showing more skin and feeling more self-conscious, I would restrict really, really badly. And then by autumn, I would fall into some binging tendencies and I would gain all the weight back and more. And that yo-yoing is really bad for you. And I did it for years and I was kind of stuck in the loop. I didn't know how to get out of it. And then at age 20, I had my more extreme case of restriction where for about the next 3 years, I stayed underweight and I was somehow able to not veer into the binging aspect. But I was still miserable. I felt guilty every time I ate food. I was obsessed. I would constantly weigh myself, body check, all of that stuff. And then over the pandemic, I gradually started to gain weight. So when I started this YouTube channel, that was kind of where I was with things. I was, gradually putting on weight and feeling horrible about it and just so miserable. And I felt like I couldn't lose weight anymore. I felt like no matter how much I restricted, it wasn't working. Even though, as it turns out, my metabolism was fine. I think I was just like restricting for very short periods of time and then kind of ricocheting back. At age 24, I hit sort of my rock bottom with this. I was at one of the highest weights that I'd been in my life, which still, wasn't very high. I've never been like a big person, but it absolutely terrified me. And my husband, my then boyfriend, and I were on a trip to Iceland, and it was amazing food. Like Icelandic food is so good, so much seafood, so fresh. Anyway, beside the point. I was eating a lot of good food, but I was feeling extremely obsessive and compulsive. I had a ton of intrusive thoughts. I was body checking like every 10 seconds when we were driving, constant body checking in the car mirrors. I felt so disgusted with myself. I was even starting to have intrusive thoughts about other things. These flashes would pop up of like horrible things happening to me. I think the pandemic brought out a very obsessive compulsive side of me. And during that trip, it really came to a head. I don't have OCD. I've never been diagnosed with it. I think I have something subclinical probably, and that's what my therapist thinks as well. But in times of stress, it really amps up where like I get extremely intrusive thoughts and I have a lot of mental compulsions. That trip was so beautiful. It was so breathtaking. I even have a video montage of it. I'll try to link it up here somewhere. And despite how incredible that place was and how much I loved it, every moment was agony. It was pure agony. And I came back from that trip and I went to therapy and I told her about that. I told her about all the intrusive thoughts, about the incredible body image distress that I was having. And she was very worried. And we had been working together for a couple of years at that point. And she said to me, like, how long are you going to do this? Like she was frustrated with me. I could tell she was frustrated with me. I felt like she was kind of done with my ED. It was just kind of tired of how treatment resistant it was. And she said, like, when are you going to start taking more proactive steps? Like, when are you going to start to go on medication like we've been talking about? And for context, I was trying pretty hard. I was really focusing on my ED in therapy. I was trying to do the homework to the best ability that I could. I was practicing the skills. I was focused on it. I didn't want to take medication because I tried medication before in the past and it wasn't for me. It didn't help me. I hated the side effects. It didn't provide me a lot of relief. I know there are people out there who find a lot of benefit from things like antidepressants, but I wasn't one of those people, and I didn't want to put my body through that. And in that moment, I felt like I was really backed into a corner, and I felt like, if you don't take this medication, I don't even know if your therapist wants to work with you anymore. I honestly felt a little bit coerced about it. And I felt like all the progress that I'd been making, which wasn't a lot, but I was trying really hard, was kind of going ignored and was going unseen. And so that day I said, fine. I had a prescription for Effexor already from a previous psychiatry appointment a couple months before, and I took a pill of Effexor. Now, if you are familiar with this drug, if it's worked for you, again, I'm very happy for you. I've even had clients for whom Effexor was very effective, but you might also be one of the many people that hate it, because there are a lot of really terrible stories out there of people who get brain zaps if they don't take it at exactly the same time the next day, or who have tried to go off of it and essentially given up on getting off of this medication because of how incredibly painful the withdrawal is. It sounds like a nightmare drug, to tell you the truth. And again, if it works for you, that is fantastic. But it was not something I felt comfortable doing. And when I took that pill, I just felt immediate regret. I'm a person who really values being able to control my own body. That's part of the reason why the ED came up in the first place, was because I was tired of being over-controlled and I wanted to take some personal agency over the one thing you can really control, which is your body. When someone is controlling every other aspect of your life, that's the one thing that you have. And so to be put in a position like that felt very disempowering for me. And it felt like I was in between a rock and a hard place, and I didn't like it. Now, you would think that this was a terrible situation, right? But as it turned out, that was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because you kind of need to realize how trapped you are, and you kind of have to be at rock bottom to truly realize what your options are. And in that situation, it became so crystal clear to me what my two options were. Option one was, you take this medication, you do everything your therapist says. And option two was, you accept that this is just always going to be a part of your life, and you just shut the fuck up about it. Stop resisting your reality. And I had sort of like an acceptance epiphany in that moment when I realized that my entire ED was essentially just a demonstration of resistance to reality, where I could not accept that my body in that given moment was the way that it was, or I could not accept that I had eaten something that I considered to be a bad food. And I was making myself miserable by resisting my own reality. I was essentially feeling grief about not being who I wanted to be in the present moment, and I was ruining the present moment because of it. And that day I said, I think I'm done with this round of therapy, and I'm not going to continue to take this medication, and I'm just going to try as much as possible to enjoy my life and to live in moderation, and to accept that, yeah, maybe my body is not exactly the way that I want it to look right now, but I'm not going to ruin today because of it. And I went to therapy the next week, and I told my therapist, I think I need a break from therapy. And I never went back to that therapist. And I really was better. I'm not saying this is possible for everyone, but it really was the flip of a switch for me. I don't know how else to put it. I had an epiphany, and I can sit here and tell you about the epiphany that I had. It's not going to be the same. You have to really feel it. I think the biggest thing is you have to feel how you do not have any other options except acceptance. You have to be in that place where you feel so incredibly trapped, where you feel it so rock bottom, that becomes vividly, abundantly clear to you. And that weekend, I traveled somewhere for somebody's wedding, And I remember, first meal of the day. Before the wedding, my husband and I went to brunch and we sat down. Previously, I would have felt so anxious about like, what am I going to have? Am I going to have something very filling to make sure that I don't get hungry later? Am I going to have as little as possible? And then I'm so scared that I'm going to get too hungry and then I'm going to eat too much later. And I just sat there and I just bought the brunch that I wanted to have, which was, somewhat healthy from what I recall. I had some of it. I didn't have all of it. I really tried to check in with my body in that moment and to think about, what do I need in this moment? How much do I want to eat? And the thing is, even though I had a restrictive ED, even though that was like the defining feature of it, I talked about how, when you ricochet to the other side because your body's, hungry and it's trying to overcompensate, you take it too far and you override your satiety cues and you eat more than you need, and you're kind of trying to self-medicate how guilty you feel about it by doing something that feels good, which is eating. But the more you override your satiety cues, the worse you feel. It doesn't have that same effect. It doesn't make you any happier. It just makes you worse and worse. It makes you feel more and more guilty and ashamed. So that was the first meal that I can really remember sitting there and going, what is my body telling me? What is my body telling me that it needs? And my body said, you know what? You actually don't need to finish everything on the plate. And I listened to that and I was fine. And that weekend I ate normally. I ate maybe like a little bit less than I would have if I had been in this like very compulsive mindset that was ricocheting to the other side. And I just continued doing that all summer. There's another meal that I remember. Once a week, my husband makes pizza for us. And during all this like yo-yoing with my ED, I couldn't help myself from having half of an entire pizza. And we were watching TV and I was eating the pizza. I had 2 slices. And I remember checking in with myself and thinking, what do you want right now? Do you want another slice or do you not? And that was the first time that I ever said, you know what? I actually think I'm good. And now look, like I know intuitive eating isn't like the right fit for everybody. I know sometimes people's hunger and satiety cues are askew. But to tell you the truth, my hunger and satiety cues were askew. I didn't know how to distinguish between physical hunger and emotional hunger. But slowly, bit by bit, day by day, that summer, I learned how to do it. I learned to listen to my body and to honor its cues and to eat exactly as much as I wanted and needed to. And that turned out to be more than when I was restricting and less than when I was binging. And now I have just a very sustainable diet. It takes no effort. I eat a pretty healthy diet. I eat a lot of nutritionally dense foods, a lot of fruits and vegetables. I am pescatarian for, ethical reasons. But I'm really in the groove of things. And when I go on vacation and I eat a lot of tasty food and I eat out a lot and I eat maybe like less nutrient dense foods for a weekend or so, I don't feel guilty. I come back from that trip knowing very well that when I come back to my usual lifestyle, that is going to put me in equilibrium. That's going to put me in homeostasis without any effort on my part. And I'll talk more about this in a second. First, I just want to touch on like the skills that I guess helped like a little bit in ED treatment. To tell you the truth, they were like maybe like a life raft. I was drowning and they were a life raft, but the thing that really pulled me out of the water, my rescue, was acceptance. These things just kind of like helped me flail around a little bit. So one thing that I remember like blew my mind at the time was learning about the concept of an ED voice and learning to distinguish between your internal monologue and the ED and sort of like personifying the voice in that way. Carolyn Costin talked about this on the channel of What Mia Did Next. And when I heard that interview, I was just like, mind blown. Something else that Carolyn Costin talked about was the idea of full recovery and the idea that it's possible. Because there are sort of like 2 factions within ED recovery. There's the faction of people who believe that you can never be fully recovered, kind of like an addict, that you're always going to have those impulses and you're always going to have to struggle with them, that it's always going to be a part of your life. And then there are the faction of people that have gone through it and they're like, nah, actually, I don't struggle with it anymore. And I'm absolutely one of the latter. And I'm so glad that I realized that could be possible for me, because it's a piece of hope that people really need in order to get out of that mindset. It's very challenging to recover if somebody is constantly telling you that you're never fully going to recover and that you're always going to be in pain. Something else that helped me was realizing that the body dysmorphic fluctuations are based more on different emotional triggers rather than reality. So, I've gone through periods where I would like fluctuate. I would have like a really terrible week versus an okay week. And I would think that the trigger was like a bad photo of me or like that I was actually putting on weight, when in reality, the trigger was something emotional, usually a stress, usually an interpersonal issue that I was going through. And so recognizing that was really helpful, and realizing like, hey, listen, it's not that you just gained 5 pounds overnight. It's like you had a fight with this person and it's kind of triggering your obsessive tendencies. I think doing like a cost benefit analysis of the ED was very helpful, kind of like motivational interviewing, realizing this is not giving me what I want and the costs are very high and it's not sustainable and it's just setting me up for a cycle of misery. What's called in DBT is surfing the wave. Honestly, just like distress tolerance, cognitive diffusion, concepts that I've like talked about on this channel before, of like realizing when you feel distress, don't try to avoid it. Don't try to medicate it. Don't try to respond with a compulsion, like restricting or weighing yourself or body checking. Just ride the wave. Just surf it out. Be confident that this is a moment of pain that's not going to last forever. At some point, it's going to go away, like all moments of pain do. And just like believe in yourself that you can do it. Mindfulness was a little helpful, just like checking in with my surroundings in times of stress, throwing myself into whatever activity I'm doing instead of obsessing, and self-compassion. The book Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff was helpful for this. So where am I at with things now? This is the part where I really hope to instill some hope in you guys. I remember when certain celebrities would say like, I used to have an ED, but now I'm fine, and they were very emaciated still. I would always throw like kind of a side eye at them, and I was like, you sure? I don't think I believe you. And I wasn't sure whether to acknowledge this or not, because I'm like, I don't really owe anyone an explanation about the way that my body is. But I thought, I understand why someone might be skeptical about whether a person has reached full recovery if they still seem to be underweight. And so for the record, the reason that I'm underweight right now is because of my work schedule, and because of the fact that honestly, I love what I do and I throw myself into it for hours at a time, and sometimes I just forget to snack. And also another thing is that when I get anxious, my appetite is kind of like gone. So those two reasons combined are why I'm slightly underweight right now. But my relationship with food has never been better. I have never valued health more than I do today. I can just eat what I want and not feel guilty. And honestly, when I check in with my body about what I want, because I value health now, usually those are very nutritionally dense foods. Like I've never been a person that really craves like fast food. That's not really how I grew up. But when I check in with myself about what do I want to eat, if I've been eating pasta and pizza all weekend because I was traveling, for instance, then when I come back and I check in with my body about what do I want to eat, usually I'm craving like a really dense, crunchy, tasty salad. There are very, very rare occasions when I'll feel guilty for maybe like a split second, and that's usually when I have dessert. Dessert was always like forbidden food for me when I had an ED, and still, sometimes I will feel like a momentary guilt over that. But it goes away. It goes away in like less than a minute, because in that moment I remember, Anna, you're going to go back home after this and you're going to step seamlessly into a routine where your body just brings itself exactly where it needs to be. So don't worry about it. You've been down this road before 100 times. You've had dessert before and then realized a couple weeks later that it wasn't the end of the world. And again, that reminder of acceptance of like, okay, if you ate something that you feel like you shouldn't have, if you overrode your satiety cues, and if you feel guilty, are you going to ruin your whole evening because of it? Are you going to ruin your whole day? Are you going to resist reality all day? Because I hate to break it to you, but what's done is done. Resisting reality isn't going to change the facts of that. It's not going to change history. Just enjoy your day. And I think the same thing happens with like when I buy a meal and I feel guilty about not being able to finish it. I tell myself the same thing. I'm like, you already bought the meal. There's no point in forcing yourself to finish it if you're not genuinely hungry. What's done is done. You already bought it. Move on. I no longer have those compulsions of like weighing myself, reassurance seeking, body checking. I'll weigh myself maybe like every 1 to 2 months. I don't really keep track of how often. It's not something that I feel an urge to do. It's just like every couple of months or so, I'm just like curious. I don't get on the scale anxious at all. It's more just like, just want to see where I'm at. I am so focused on health now. When you have an ED, the focus is on thinness and oftentimes to the antithesis of health, where you're like, I just want to be the thinnest person in the room. I don't care about health. I don't care if this puts me in an early grave. I just want to be the thinnest person, and I don't have that anymore. I want to live long, and I want to eat foods that help me live long. I can't remember the last time I had like a body dysmorphic episode, the last time I had body image distress to an extreme extent. Listen, that's not to say that sometimes you're not going to have something that you're self-conscious about, or you're not going to hyperfixate on something. I'm a firm believer that a lot of EDs are due to obsessive compulsive tendencies, and obsessive compulsive tendencies oftentimes contain a body dysmorphic element to them. It just doesn't take up that much space in my life anymore. It's not something that like ruins my week or my day. It's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And I suspect this is also partly just growing up, you reach age 25 and, your brain's fully cooked and you're just able to kind of realize that you were freaking out over nothing before. I never feel the urge to restrict. I never feel the urge to binge. I actually hardly remember that mindset anymore. It's hard to put myself back in my shoes. I touched on this before, like EDs just don't interest me anymore. When I was in recovery, I was interested in them clinically, and now I'm just like, I just don't care anymore because it's no longer a part of my identity. I no longer see my ED or thinness as a part of who I am. And I'm also untriggerable because of that. I no longer have that competitiveness of like when I hear a girl talking about her diet or her ED or being thin, like I don't compare really. I don't care. It doesn't upset me. And when I was in the throes of my ED and in the throes of my turbulent recovery, I was so easily triggered. I wanted the whole world to revolve around my triggers. And once you're actually fully recovered, you realize that's not necessary. If you work through those triggers and you stop making the ED a part of your identity, you realize that people could say anything to you. Things that used to trigger me, a family member speaking about somebody else's weight or making comments about my body, someone talking about a diet, particularly thin celebrity. It doesn't work anymore. I'm untriggerable. I might not agree with certain things, like, making rude comments about someone's body, but it's not going to make me restrict. And I no longer feel that grief over the present moment not being exactly as I need it to be. I do a much better job now of just savoring the present moment, enjoying the day, and just flowing with whatever life throws at me. Now, here's where I get a little bit controversial, and some of you might get upset with me. But I want to be truthful about my journey with this. So there were certain things about my mindset when I was in recovery, the mindset of a lot of recovery therapists that I no longer agree with. I remember when I was in recovery, the idea of body neutrality really appealed to me. And now I'm like, I don't want to feel neutrally about my body. I actually think it's okay to pursue looking in a way that makes you happy. It's okay to like how you look. You don't have to feel completely neutral about it. For me, beauty is one of my core values still. And when I talk about beauty, I'm talking about like expressing the world's beauty through art, specifically through writing. I'm talking about like making my surroundings beautiful, having decor that reflects who I am as a person, wearing clothing and makeup that feels authentic to me, and liking my body. So I don't buy into the body neutrality sauce anymore. It feels a little bit extreme to me now looking back to say that like you have to neither like nor dislike your body. You have to just be completely neutral towards it. No, your body is your vessel. It's a part of you. It's an important part of you. It's okay to sometimes modify your body in ways that are sustainable and healthy if it gets you closer to liking what you look like. So like when I was in recovery, I thought that all diets were bad. Like I'm just being for real with you. I thought that all diets were a form of restriction that lies on a spectrum with EDs. And now looking back on it, I'm like, that's so ridiculous, girl. Like people sometimes need to lose weight for health reasons. And even if they just want to like lose 5 pounds, like they're entitled to like their body. If a diet is healthy and it's done in moderation and it's sustainable, and really if it's a lifestyle change, a diet shouldn't be like something you do for a period of time. A diet should be your lifestyle day after day for the foreseeable future. If you're doing it that way, I think there's nothing wrong. Like I said, I also no longer think that the world needs to revolve around my triggers. I remember when I was in recovery, I would constantly ask people like, hey, please don't say that, or don't comment on this, or don't point out things about my body, or don't talk about food around me. And now I'm just like, fuck it. Like, who am I to police what somebody else does? Like, I'm not going to get triggered by it. They can say whatever they want. And here's something else that I feel like is really, really important. When I was in ED treatment, there was a lot of attention on the ED. And where attention goes, energy flows. I think that when I was focusing so much on my ED, paradoxically, it made it worse. That's not to say you shouldn't confront things head on. I think you should. And like I said, I gained a lot of valuable skills from doing that in therapy. But ultimately, what helped me transcend my ED was focusing on something else that was healthy. Instead of focusing on diminishing this thing that had a huge presence in my life, focusing on acceptance, focusing on mindfulness, focusing on having a healthy, sustainable lifestyle. Doing those things pushed my ED so far away I can't even see it on the horizon anymore. I think at the end of the day, there's only so much progress you can make when you're giving so much energy to something that's negative in your life. And ironically, if you want to remove that thing from your life, at some point you have to turn your attention to something positive. This is different from avoidance. Avoidance is actually going to worsen the thing. It's going to make it larger in your life. I'm not talking about avoidance. Avoidance would be like putting your ED in a box and locking the door and pushing it away. What I'm talking about is more like turning slightly to look at something else. You still know it's there, you're just not giving it energy. If you've watched all the way to the end, thank you very much. I hope that this helped even just one person. It's not easy coming on here and being vulnerable about this stuff, especially because there's a lot of messaging to people in the field of psychology and therapy about how you shouldn't talk about these things. You shouldn't self-disclose too much because what are people going to think? They're not going to be able to see you as a blank slate anymore. Anytime you share a vulnerability on the internet, people will use that as a way to attack you. But like I said, I'm untriggerable at this point. And so if that's the way it's going to be, then that's the way it's going to be. I just want to come on here and share things that could be helpful for other people who are in the place where I was a few years ago. If this is something that you're struggling with, I just want you to know that you deserve to get better, you deserve treatment, and full recovery is possible for you. If it was possible for me and I thought that I had a very treatment-resistant form of it and I experienced this for 10 years, then it's possible for you as well. I hope you take care.